Hi everyone, this is Jim. Welcome to round 26 coverage of the Zurich 1953 Candidates Tournament. For round 26, I'd selected the game Taimanov versus Kotov to take a look at. Mark Taimanov, a Russian grandmaster at 89 years old. He's one of the two players from the tournament who's still alive today. He's famous for being a concert pianist as well as a grandmaster, and also for the Taimanov variation in the Sicilian. So his opponent with the black pieces is Alexander Kotov. I've got a picture of him here from, this is a few years before the tournament, so didn't have one taken right at that time, but that's a younger Kotov. So he was a strong Russian grandmaster for many years, as well as a trainer of other Russian grandmasters, including Boris Spassky, and he wrote the famous book, Think Like a Grandmaster. So here, let's get started with the game. Taimanov kicks off with the d4. Oh, I guess I had a couple of preliminary remarks. One is this is a great positional demonstration from Taimanov, this game is. So watch out for how he accumulates positional advantages, and watch how he plays on both sides of the board. Very interesting characteristics. And then a third aspect of the game I wanted to talk about is the opening. This is one of those openings that went out of style for a while and then came back into style. So here, let's get to the position I'm talking about. So d4, knight f6, c4, and e6, as if intending to play a Nimzo-Indian. And Taimanov goes knight f3, avoiding the Nimzo-Indian, and Kotov plays d5. And at this point, we've transposed into a queen's gambit declined. And the main move here is the classical variation with bishop to e7, and this has been played many times. I guess lately people have been playing bishop e7 before knight f6 even, just as a little move order wrinkle because of the exchange of pawns here. It's an improvement. But in this game, after knight c3, black doesn't play bishop e7, he plays bishop b4, the Rogozin variation. And so this is the line I wanted to talk about. The Rogozin variation was out of popularity for many years, but recently has started being played again. And if you think about it, it's really a more active way for black to play. And the white players have really not found an antidote to it, so it seems to be a perfectly valid way to play, just wasn't played very often for quite a while. And in fact, there was a game, let's go on a few more moves. After the exchange, which is normal, the most common move here for white is to play bishop g5, setting up a counter pin. Well, let's take a look at that first. That's the main line. I was a little bit interested in exploring that. So bishop g5, knight bd7, and these aren't the only moves. This is just how the main line goes: e3, c5, and it's kind of logical. The knight is defending the other knight, so the queen doesn't get distracted. And then the pawn here is counterattacking the center. And after bishop to d3, the queen comes out to a5. So as a point of supporting the knight was allowing the queen to come out and putting pressure on this pinned knight. Now the knight can be supported with queen c2, and then c4, kicking the bishop, and then bishop f5. So this is the main line. And it's an interesting and kind of complicated position. Notice that both sides are going to get to castle. All the pieces are still on the board. And there's just a dynamic element in the position due to the way the pieces are distributed, with black over here on the queen side, and white maybe getting some activity on the king side or perhaps in the center. So an interesting way to play. The line that Taimanov played at this point was the move queen a4 check. So this is not as common, but it's still a respectable line. And in fact, it was this position that occurred in the recent game Aronian against Anand. And so that was I was just struck by the fact that they're still playing exactly the same line. So that was played in this year, 2015, at the Grinky Chess Classic, Aronian Anand. I'll put a pointer to that in the description if you want to compare the modern handling of this opening to the way this game was played. But in fact, they follow the same moves from here up to move 10. So let's continue on a few moves. Knight c6. This is the only move. So that's the queen was checking the king and attacking the bishop, and this is the only move that both protects the bishop and blocks the check, so that was pretty forced. Now bishop g5 is played, the thematic idea in this opening, and h6 kicking the bishop. And white in this position, he doesn't mind giving up the bishop pair. His idea is he doesn't really want this dark squared bishop because he's going to set up this pawn wall on the dark squares, and the bishop would just be somewhat hindered and not a very active piece. So he just trades it off and puts up a solid wall of pawns. Now black castles here, bishop e2. And in the Iranian Anand game, Anand played the move a6 here. What Kotov played in this position is bishop e6. So this is where the positions diverge. Actually, bishop e6 is still the main move in the database, interestingly. So castles, and now a6. This is the way it's typically played. So when Anand played that move a6, a move early, maybe he was just trying to get out of the opening book a little bit, hoping to avoid some potential preparation that Iranian might have had. And anyway, the game diverges from there, but I just thought it was interesting how this opening is still being played. And actually, it was quite unpopular. You almost never saw it, and now it's suddenly showed up again at the top levels. Okay, so Taimanov continues bringing the F rook over to the C file. So it looks like white is going to try and operate on the queen side for a while. Bishop to d6 was played. This bishop is no longer doing anything particularly useful on the square. The knight's no longer pinned, so it just drops back to a central location. It doesn't want to be a target forever on b4. It keeps the knight tied down, so now the knight's free to move. And the bishop is securely positioned here. So the queen drops back to d1, and so maybe Taimanov is switching back to a more central plan. We'll see. Knight e7. Looks like black is planning some maneuvers onto the king side, and we see that even though his pieces are centrally located, he continues probing the queen side with this move, knight a4, Taimanov does. And that actually provokes a pawn move from black. So the threat is the knight is coming into c5 here, and that's a pretty good position for the knight, and it might force a trade of one of these bishops. So b6, a logical move, keeping the knight out, but also potentially creating some weaknesses now on the queen side. And the knight, having done its job, it just drops back to c3. So rook f to d8, continuing to develop. And now queen f1, the second of these little probing moves that Taimanov is employing, trying to poke and prod at his opponent's position and trying to induce some weaknesses. So it's hitting the a-pawn, and the a-pawn doesn't really want to come forward. That would actually create a weak square on b5 for the knight to hop into. So instead of moving the a-pawn forward, Kotov finds a clever way of defending the a-pawn by moving the pawn to c6. Now it's not safe to take the a-pawn because the move b5 would trap the bishop there. So that pawn is immune. So the move c6 really did defend the a-pawn. But now it left the b-pawn weak, and now the knight goes right back to a4. So the knight went here and back again. But it's hitting b6, and something needs to be done about that. Once again, the pawn doesn't want to come all the way forward to b5, because then the knight could hop into this excellent c5 square. So black defends the pawn. And now rook to c3, doubling on the c-file, or preparing to double on the c-file. a5 was played, just getting the pawn out of the glare of the bishop and freeing up these rooks for other activities. Rook a to c1. And the bishop drops back to d7, defending the c-pawn securely against the knight. Now a3 is played. This is to keep the bishop from coming into the square b4 and chasing the rook. So these rooks have got a solid spots on the c-file here where they can maintain this pressure. And now knight to g6 was played. There's a line mentioned by Bronstein. Sometimes black in these positions, to try and gain a little more space and activity for his pieces, wants to get in the move c5. And Bronstein is pointing out it doesn't work too well in this position. c5, d takes c5. This is probably still playable, and bishop takes, but it's not looking too attractive. And white has the option here of taking the bishop immediately. That's probably the best move. Or also there's the move queen d1 is interesting here for white, and a pretty comfortable position. So this this push of the c-pawn is a bit premature at this point. The other way to play this, after taking the knight on a4 is under attack, and if the bishop grabs the knight, of course this bishop was under attack too, the queen can grab the pawn, and then white has the move bishop to b5, and this is actually another very comfortable position for white. This isolated queen pawn is going to be a weakness. White is going to succeed in trading off the dark squared bishop, which is the natural defender of that pawn, and he's going to have an excellent position against the isolated queen pawn. With most of the minor pieces already gone, he's ready to set up a battery against the pawn and push e4 at the right moment to really eliminate that. So really excellent position for white. So Kotov doesn't want to go for any of that. He keeps the c-pawn back and maneuvers with his knight to g6. So a reasonable choice. And this game is still, in spite of these little moves that Taimanov has played, the game is still in the range of even. So now he puts a bishop on d3, pointing at the knight. Queen to e6. Black doesn't really have an active plan. To some degree, he's just kind of moving his pieces back and forth and trying to trying to be flexible and ready to respond to whatever white decides to do. White brings his queen back to d1. This is the beginning of another queen maneuver. Over to the other side of the board, the bishop drops back to c7. Another defender on the b pawn, I guess, and then queen c2. So this was the idea, the queen maneuver. He's attacking the knight, and he's also increasing the pressure on the c-pawn. The knight goes to e7. Doesn't want to stay here and get traded off and maybe produce some kind of pawn weakness on the king side, so goes back where it came from. And now it looks like white has done as much as he can against the c-pawn. This knight is not in a position to put more force against the pawn. You know, I guess the move bishop to b4 might have been played. Here, let's take a brief look at that. Bishop here, bishop b5. No, this doesn't work. Okay, I was thinking, oh, you're right. The problem is the pawn is hitting the knight as well as the bishop. Okay, so anyway, it's the point is it's difficult for white to increase the pressure on the pawn, and knight coming here to add more pressure is not working. That'll just get traded off. So once again, Taimanov switches tack and plays rook to e1, looking maybe to switch back to activity on the center. So this does provoke a reaction from Kotov, which maybe is not the best. The chess engine is suggesting that black can continue sitting still with moves like queen d6, just keeping the queen in the neighborhood of the center. And if white pushes on with e4, I mean, it looks like rook e1 was designed to support the e4 push on the center. This exchange works out okay for black. He can get his knight to this square. If white trades off that knight, black can take back with the queen and get a comfortable position. So this is still okay for black. Instead, he played f5, which has the virtue that it really stops the e4 move, not only on the next move, but for quite a long time. So white is just not going to get the move e4 in. So it may be that he wasn't afraid of the immediate e4, but maybe he was worried about e4 occurring some point down the road. So he played the move f5. But this does create another target and a bit of a weakness on the king side. So another one of the positional advantages Taimanov has managed to accumulate. And now, having provoked a weakness on the queen side, he switches back. Having provoked a weakness on the king side, Taimanov switches back to the queen side with the move b4. So actually the chess engine doesn't really approve of this move. The chess engine wants to kind of just sit on the position here with some queen moves or perhaps even the move g3 to shut down on this f5 possibility, which is actually something that black can look to. But anyway, Taimanov wants to get some activity going and maybe provoke some more weaknesses, so he plays b4. But this move is double-edged because, of course, it creates weak pawns for white as well as black. So a takes b4, a takes b4, and bishop to d6, targeting the pawn. Now, once again, the move c5 is not so great. It's actually playable here. So first of all, let's look at the variation Bronstein gives. It's kind of a cute one. So with c5, the knight drops back to b2, and if the pawn pushes on to c4, this is actually a blunder. So there's a tactic here for white, and if you want to take a minute, see if you can spot the tactic. It's kind of an interesting one. Okay, I'm going to give the answer away. It turns out you can just take this pawn, take it with the knight, and after black takes back, you get this great skewer on the queen and the king. Now, it's not over here. Black can defend with the knight. But after you trade off the knight, a second problem shows up, which is this bishop on c7 is undefended, and you just get your piece back. So if we pause to count the material, the pieces are even, and white has just scooped up 2 pawns. So you can't really play that way. But what you can do in this position after c5, setting up a little tension over here on the queen side, you could play a move like queen to f6, just once again kind of sitting still and maybe even threatening f5 here in some circumstances. So this is okay for black. He could actually play this way. Taimanov didn't go down, Kotov didn't go down that road. He played bishop to d6. And that line, I suppose, helps explain why he wanted to get the bishop off of the c file, so the c pawn is free to move, and the bishop is in a position to support it. The bishop is also just attacking the b pawn there. So rook to b1, supporting the pawn. And now Kotov makes the first mistake. So up until this point, I would say everything has been about even. The advantage on the chess engine evaluation has swung back and forth between black and white, and not straying too far from even in either case. But after this move, b5 is what Kotov plays. He's worried about the move b5 from Taimanov. He wants to avoid having his pawns broken up, and so he plays the move b5, which really freezes the structure on the queen side, but it creates a permanently backwards pawn on c6. So there are other alternatives here. The chess engine is suggesting moves like queen to f7 or bishop to e8. And those aren't moves that do a whole lot, although putting the queen on the f-file also revives this idea of pushing the f-pawn forward. And anyway, just sitting on this structure here on the queen side. But Kotov played b5, so putting a stop to any idea of white advancing the b-pawn. Just to illustrate one line, if queen f7 had been played and white tried b5, it turns out this is okay. Black can take that pawn, the knight drops back, and then he can even push on with f4. So this pawn does come to life. And it looks a little scary that white has this apparent pressure on the c-file. But notice these minor pieces here are nicely controlling all of these entry points. Even the knight is contributing to controlling key squares. And so it's actually difficult for white to penetrate, and black is doing okay in this position. So he really didn't need to be afraid of the immediate b5. But anyway, when Kotov plays b5, he puts an end to the advance of the b-pawn once and for all, and actually fixes a target for his own pieces. So it has some merit. But now the knight hops into the square on c5, and this is going to force some trades. It's forking the queen and the bishop, and the queen has no square to move to that defends the bishop. So this actually has to be taken. That's forced. And then white takes back with the rook. And notice it's important that in this position, white's not interested in taking with the pawn. If he takes with the pawn, that just covers up the weak c-square. He takes with the rook so that he can maintain his pressure on c6. So Kotov tries for counterplay with the rook a4, going after the weak b-pawn once again. And now knight e5. And now you can start to see the accumulation of advantages is really gathering steam here. This knight is really in an excellent post where it's on a dark square, so it can't be challenged by the bishop, and it's hitting some key squares in the camp of in black's camp, and also white has pressure on the c-file against the weak c6 pawn. Kotov plays rook b to a8. He has a plan in mind of exchanging off a few pieces to relieve the pressure. Queen to e2 is played. Taimanov, having fixed the queen side pretty well, is now shifting his attention back to the king side again. Bishop to e8 is played. This keeps the queen out of the h4 square, h5 square, and the queen goes to f3, looking at the f-pawn. Now Kotov continues with his plan. He wants to trade off these pieces, so rook a1, and well, Taimanov drops his rook back to c1. We get this exchange. Taimanov wanted to maintain a rook on b1 supporting this pawn, and now g6 was played. Cancel that. G6, supporting the f-pawn. This pawn was starting to experience some pressure. It wasn't falling immediately, but when it's securely supported by the pawn on g6, then the knight and the queen are free to move. So a reasonable move. And now this is where Bronstein pauses to consider the options. He says that basically white has achieved everything that a positional player might want, except for control of the a-file. But everything else looks to be in white's favor here. Notice all these pawns that are on light squares. 5 out of 6 pawns are on light squares, which block in the bishop, so the bishop has no scope. He's got this excellent knight that can't be attacked easily. The only piece that can really confront it now is the other knight, and that knight is tied down defending the weaknesses. His pieces are well posted attacking all the weaknesses, and he's got a couple weaknesses to target here. So the question here that Bronstein poses is, how would you proceed? What is your plan from this point? Now that you've accumulated these advantages, you need to cash them in at some point. He doesn't really like Taimanov's plan, so he has a different idea. So there's a couple different plans possible in the position. In fact, there's 3 different plans I'll show you. But why don't you take a minute to pause the video and see what you would do in this position. See if you can formulate a plan for white. Okay, let's start out with Bronstein's recommendation. His idea was, look, we've already got a lot of pressure on these light squared pawns, and his king is looking a bit airy, so why don't we just continue attacking on the light squares? So his idea is to play h3 and g4. And this is a very reasonable way to play. The chess engine approves of this. What Taimanov played instead is the move h4 rather than h3, so putting his pawns on dark squares, just continuing to fix these weaknesses. And this is also a valid plan. So all these plans are valid. It's not like one is right and one is wrong. There's just different ways to proceed. And you can see Bronstein, the more active player, is inclined to try and bust things up with pawns on h3 and g4. He'd be forcing some action. Now, the idea that Taimanov had with the h4 move is to follow up with queen g3. After king g7, then queen g3, and then he's going to push the f-pawn, and this h-pawn is restraining restraining black's g-pawn, keeping it from coming forward, and this f-pawn to f4 will also continue to restrain his pawns. So just fixing these targets and attacking them. The third plan here is actually one the chess engine came up with. I thought was very interesting as well. It liked the move h4, and then it wanted to follow that up with queen to d1. So just leaving things fixed on the king side and starting to maneuver back to the queen side again. Knight to c8 is the main line here, trying to control the a-file because queen d1 supports the rook to a1. So we get this exchange, queen here, and now knight to d6, maneuvering the knight to a better square, and the queen invades with queen a7 check. So that's the chess engine recommendation. It's this maneuver here with the queen, where the queen goes completely around the board to attack the king from the other side, whereas Taimanov is just moving the queen directly to g3 and attacking in this way and supporting it with supporting it with the move f4. So all those are interesting plans, and I have some points. So queen to d6 was played, and now f4, fixing these pawns on the light squares, and h5. He just wants to stop, and this actually is probably the best move here. He needs to stop white from playing h5, and this seems to be the only way to do it. But yet another pawn is on a light square. Notice that all 6 of black's pawns are on the same color square as his bishop. So a positional nightmare for black here. Now bishop to e2, threatening the 8 just to take on h5, which is pinned. And he could defend with king to h7, try and hold on that way, but Kotov goes for a more active plan, and a pretty interesting one. He plays rook a4, and this would be good if not for one particular move. Well, actually, white gets an advantage even in this other line, but here, let's show probably what Kotov had intended, something like bishop takes h5, and then rook takes b4. He gets his pawn over here. And after an exchange, rook takes, queen takes. There is a tricky line here where the bishop can grab another pawn, but maybe just king to h2 is the safest move. But anyway, let's show this complicated line. The reason you can grab another pawn here is because after knight takes back, you have the move h5, which is going to get some material back. Now the queen needs to come running back to defend. And then after this, black can push the b pawn forward. So what's happened is a lot of the force has been removed, and black has got some counterplay. So this is an active way for black to play, and this pawn is maybe going to come under fire. Although also this pawn acts to shield the black king, so it's not clear that he wants to grab that pawn right away. Maybe he wants to leave it there and just push his queenside pawns forward. And so that's a position that black could think of holding. So that was probably what Kotov had in mind with this rook a4 idea when he brought his rook forward to a4. But cancel that to a4. But Taimanov did not play the immediate bishop takes h5. He played another move which is stronger. So here's another chance for you to think like a grandmaster. See if you can find the move that Taimanov played here. And it's not a tactical move as much as it is a positional move with some tactical ideas in it. Okay, Taimanov played the move bishop to d1. This is a great move. After the bishop comes to d1, there's nothing great for this rook to do. If he just drops back to a2, then white can grab the pawn without losing the b pawn, so he's just a pawn up. So this forces the reply rook takes b4, the best move in the circumstances. And now not trading in this case, but placing the rook on a1. That's the positional idea. So the bishop is controlling the a4 square, so the rook can't come back. Black's rook can't come back to oppose white's rook, and so white has garnered the A file for his to add to his positional achievement. So the last thing that was missing from that picture of complete positional dominance has been achieved. He got the A file. So knight to c8 is played to try and defend at least the a7 point from invasion by the rook. But the rook can come all the way into a8 and hitting these pieces along the back rank. The knight is actually loose and needs to be defended. And now it's pretty much game over. The chess engine suggests the best defense for black is the move rook b1. This is a tricky line, and it's still losing in the end. White can go ahead and grab the rook. Black grabs the bishop. King moves out of the way. And then the queen has to come over to defend the bishop, so queen e7, and now queen g5, just invading with the queen. And this pawn is going to fall one way or another, and white is going to win that endgame after the queen trade. So this is just a winning position for white, and that was with best play. Kotov tried something different, but like I said, it was a difficult position here. Let's see, we went queen e6, defending the knight. And now white can just grab this pawn. And he's invading on the light squares around the king here. So the king goes back to f8. This pawn is no longer defensible. And the king is just trying to get out of trouble. Also, by defending the bishop, he frees up his pieces to move. Bishop takes on g6. Bishop takes. Knight takes with check. The king goes to e8. Now the king needs to run over and defend the knight. Also still running away from this threatened attack on the g-file. The knight hops into e5, going back to its excellent square where it's really unopposed. King goes on to d8, defending the knight, so at least the queen is free to move. The queen just rushes into g7 and penetrating on the g-file. This rook tries to get back into the game, going back to a4, challenging the rook on the a-file. But this, the rook, Taimanov is not interested in trading off his pieces. He's got an excellent attack going here, so he moves his rook to the b-file. Kotov plays c5, and then after rook b7, he resigns. Actually, there's a forced mate on the board at this position, a mate in 6 with best play. So it is game over, and Kotov resigned. So I hope you guys enjoyed this one. I had a few other comments. For this round, there was another really interesting game between Gligorich with the white pieces and Geller with the black pieces in the King's Indian defense. So if you're interested in the King's Indian, you might want to check that one out. On the top boards, it was funny, all the top 4 players played each other this round just by some strange coincidence. We had Bronstein against Smyslov and Reshevsky against Keres, and both those games ended in short draws. I think the leaders have conceded the tournament to Smyslov at this point, and we're happy to take a rest day. But all the other boards were playing interesting games still. So that's it for this round. The standings are still the same. After 26 rounds, we have Smyslov at 16 points, Reshevsky in second place at 14.5, Bronstein in third place at 14, and Keres in fourth place at 13.5 points. Stay tuned for coverage of round 27. See you then. Bye.